All right, so today we are taking a deep dive into something that affects every single one of us, the executive branch and the bureaucracy.
And we're going way beyond just the textbook definitions here.
Exactly. We
Mm.
really want to understand the impact this branch has on our daily lives. Like, what does it actually do?
And trust me, there are going to be some surprises along the way.
I'm sure. So for this deep dive, we're using this presentation called, get this, the executive branch and bureaucracy.
Very straightforward.
Right. So the presentation kicks off by defining the executive branch as the part of government that carries out and enforces laws.
Which, on the surface, sounds simple enough.
Right, but the intro slide makes it clear that we're talking about way more than just the president.
And it's huge EE. Think about it like a massive network.
A network of what?
People, organizations, all working together to make the government actually function.
Okay, so not just the president, but a whole team.
Whole team, yeah. And that's
Yeah.
one of the key things. We're going to be looking at how the whole system works, not just the figurehead.
And that system includes, what, millions of employees just in the federal bureaucracy?
Millions, yeah. I mean, think about it. Everyone's interacted with the Social Security Administration at some point.
Or visited a national park. That's the bureaucracy in action.
Exactly. And that's barely scratching the surface.
There's more.
Oh, yeah. What's really interesting is that independent agencies like the EPA,
The Environmental Protection Agency.
right, the EPA or the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, even the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, they're all part of this branch too.
Hold on. If they're independent, how can they be part of the executive branch? That seems kind of contradictory.
It is a bit unique. It's all about finding a balance, giving them some autonomy to handle complex issues, but still having them ultimately accountable to the president.
So independent, but with some oversight.
Exactly. And it makes the executive branch way more adaptable.
Okay, that makes sense. So to kind of break down the key players here, we've got the president, obviously, serving a 4-year term. And, thinking about it now, that's not a ton of time to have a lasting impact on such a massive system, is it?
4 years goes by fast, especially when you're dealing with something this complex. It definitely forces you to prioritize.
I bet. Every decision has to count.
Exactly. You have to think long term, but you also got to get things done within that 4-year window.
Wow. Okay, so then there's the vice president and, of course, the cabinet,
Ah, yes, the cabinet.
made up of the heads of all those executive departments.
All 15 of them.
Defense, Treasury, Justice. You ever try to name them all off the top of your head?
It's harder than it looks.
It really is. But it's a good way to understand how much responsibility the executive branch actually has, right?
Absolutely. Each department has its own specific focus area, but they all contribute to the president's overall agenda.
Speaking of agenda, this presentation makes a really interesting point.
Mm.
The executive branch doesn't just execute laws, does it?
No, it doesn't. That's just part of the story.
It actually helps shape them,
Right. The president can propose legislation, issue executive orders.
which have the force of law.
Exactly. And the president can set the policy direction for all those departments and agencies we talked about.
Oh, wow. So there's a lot of influence there.
A lot of influence. Yep. And then you have to factor in the president's role as commander-in-chief.
That always sounds so serious. Commander-in-chief.
Because it is serious business. We're talking foreign policy, national security, decisions that have global implications.
So what does that mean for the average person? Like, what's the real impact of all this executive branch power?
Well, that's the thing. Its influence touches so many parts of our lives, maybe even more than we realize.
More than we realize, huh? Okay, I'm intrigued. So give me an example. How does the executive branch affect, like, my daily life?
Well, think about it this way. From the air we breathe to the taxes we pay, the executive branch is involved.
Okay, that sounds kind of broad, though. What's a more specific example, something people can really relate to?
How about the IRS?
The IRS taxes.
Exactly. The IRS is like a prime example of the bureaucracy in action, right? But what they do is directly tied to the president's priorities.
Wait, so you're saying the president decides how much each person pays in taxes?
No, not exactly. But their administration, their team, sets the overall tone for tax policy.
So, like, pushing for tax cuts for certain groups.
Right, or advocating to close loopholes, things like that. Those big picture goals then get translated into real regulations and procedures by the IRS.
Okay, that's starting to make more sense. So the president's agenda influences the IRS, which then impacts how much we pay.
Exactly. It's a direct impact on people's wallets, no doubt about it.
Wow, and it really shows how all these different parts of the executive branch work together.
It's like a chain reaction, right? The president sets the vision, the Treasury Department develops the framework, and then the IRS actually makes it happen.
Makes sense. All right, so we've got taxes. What about something a little less taxing?
Haha, less taxing.
The presentation also mentions the National Park Service, something near and dear to my heart.
Wow, yes, the great outdoor.
I love a good hike,
Uh,
But I never really connected that to the executive branch.
Well, it's all about who's in charge. The National Park Service falls under the Department of the Interior,
Okay, there rings a bell.
and the president appoints the Secretary of the Interior.
Ah, so the president's choice for that position could have a big impact on how our national parks are managed.
Huge impact. We're talking about conservation efforts, accessibility of trails, even how many campsites are available.
Wow, so even something like going camping is connected to decisions made within the executive branch.
Pretty much everything is connected, if you look closely enough.
Yeah.
And speaking of things that affect us all, we can't forget about the Environmental Protection Agency.
The EPA.
Right. And as we mentioned earlier, they're one of those independent agencies that have this unique position within the executive branch.
Specialized expertise, some autonomy.
Exactly. But their decisions, well, those can impact everything from the air we breathe to the water we drink.
High stakes.
Definitely high stakes. And that's where the balance of power comes in, right? The president might appoint the EPA administrator, so their policies and priorities can really influence the agency's direction.
It's like this intricate web, isn't it? Everything's connected, even if it's not always obvious.
It is. And we've just been talking about domestic stuff. What about national security, foreign policy?
Oh yeah, those feel like a whole different ballgame.
They are. And that's where the president's role as commander-in-chief comes into play.
Commander-in-chief. I mean, it sounds important.
It's the most powerful role the president has. It means they have ultimate authority over the U.S. military.
Like deploying troops?
Troop deployments, military strategy, the use of force. We're talking life or death decisions.
Whoa, heavy stuff.
Yeah.
And those decisions can impact our relationships with other countries, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yep.
The president negotiates treaties, appoints ambassadors, sets the entire tone for U.S. foreign policy.
It's a lot of responsibility.
A lot of tea, but it's a constant reminder that the executive branch doesn't just operate within our borders. It's on a global stage.
This is all fascinating. But one thing that's always confused me is executive orders.
Executive orders, huh?
Yeah. They have the force of law, but how is that different from, like, a regular law passed by Congress?
That's a great question. Executive orders are basically directives that the president issues to manage how the federal government operates.
And they don't need Congress to sign off on them?
Nope. No congressional approval needed, which is why they have that force of law aspect.
So the president can just bypass Congress completely?
Well, not completely. There are limits. Executive orders can only address things that are within the president's existing authority, either from the Constitution or from laws that Congress has already passed.
So they can't just make up new laws out of thin air?
Exactly. It's more about interpreting and implementing existing laws or directing federal agencies to do certain things.
Okay, I see. Like the president could issue an executive order to strengthen environmental regulations or to change how immigration procedures work.
Exactly. It's a way for the president to influence policy and make things happen within their term.
But couldn't the next president just come in and undo all that?
You've hit on a key point. Executive orders aren't permanent. A future president could absolutely reverse them.
So that's why they're often so controversial, right?
Yep. They can be a big point of contention between different administrations.
Okay, well, I think I understand executive orders a bit better now. But wow, we've covered a lot of ground here. From taxes and parks to environmental protection and national security, it's clear that the executive branch has its fingers in a lot of pies.
It does. And its impact on our lives is undeniable. But with that power comes a really important question. How can we, as citizens, actually engage with this branch and hold it accountable?
That's what I was just thinking. Yeah, I mean, it's so massive, it can feel impossible to make a difference. So how do we do it? Where do we even start?
I know, right? It can feel kind of overwhelming thinking about this huge system with all its moving parts.
It can be a lot, yeah.
But hey, the fact that we're even talking about it, trying to understand how it all works, that's got to be a step in the right direction, right?
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, that's for sure. Understanding the executive branch, how it's structured, what it does, that's the first step to engaging with it effectively.
Okay, so besides just, staying informed,
Wait.
what can people actually do? What are some concrete actions listeners can take?
Well, remember, the executive branch isn't some faceless entity. It's made up of people.
Okay, real people.
Real people, yeah. And those
Sure.
people are accountable to us, the public.
So how do we hold their feet to the fire?
Uh-huh. Love that. Well, a good place to start is by connecting with your elected officials.
Like our representatives in Congress.
Exactly. Your senators, too. They have a voice in shaping legislation and holding the executive branch accountable. All right, so make those phone calls, write those emails.
Yes, show up at town hall meetings, make your voice heard.
Don't be shy about it.
Don't be shy at all. And, never underestimate the power of public pressure.
Like what? Joining advocacy groups.
Advocacy groups, signing petitions, participating in peaceful demonstrations. Those are all ways to amplify your voice and bring attention to the issues you care about.
There's strength in numbers.
Absolutely. Collective action can make a real difference. Now, what about those independent agencies we talked about, like the EPA?
Right. They're not directly under a cabinet secretary, so how do we influence them?
Well, a lot of agencies have public comment periods.
Public comment periods.
Yeah, it's a chance for citizens to give their input on proposed rules and regulations.
Oh, interesting. So we can actually share our thoughts and concerns directly with the agency?
Exactly. Share your expertise, your ideas, anything you think is relevant. It's a real opportunity to make your voice heard.
So it's all about being informed, knowing the process, and then finding those opportunities to participate.
Yes, be an active participant, not just a passive observer.
I love that.
Yeah.
And it's not a one-time thing either, right? I mean, the executive branch is constantly changing and adapting.
Always evolving, new challenges pop up, circumstances change. It's a continuous process.
So it's an ongoing conversation. And this deep dive has given us a solid foundation to participate in that conversation.
It really has. We've covered the structure, the key players, the impact this branch has on our lives.
And now it's up to us to keep learning, keep questioning, keep engaging.
Exactly.
We've talked about everything from taxes to the environment, national parks to the president's role as commander-in-chief. It's a lot to take in. But I think the biggest takeaway for me is that the executive branch, as powerful as it is, isn't untouchable.
It's definitely not. At the end of the day, it's accountable to the people.
And we can make a difference.
We can by staying informed, speaking up, and holding our elected officials responsible.
Well said. This deep dive has been truly eye-opening.
I agree.
It's amazing how much we just sort of take for granted about how our government works.
And how much influence we actually have.
If we just choose to use it.
Exactly.
Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for diving into this with me.
My pleasure. It's been great exploring these ideas with you.
And to all of you listening out there, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the executive branch. Keep those brains buzzing, and we'll catch you on the next one.